So I have, if you look in here, in your folder, the other piece. I'm not going to do all the lecture about Chapter 6. So these 4 little pieces here, really the first 3 are about what I want to talk about. If you're really interested, that public key infrastructure, there's another lecture about that. So I'm going to hit a couple of the highlights, but the majority of the lecture is the author of the textbook there for you to look at. If you scroll up even further, you can find that there is a lecture about secure sockets, HTTPS, and this happens to be from a lecturer at MIT through their OpenCourseWare program. If you guys want to learn, OpenCourseWare is a great way to do it, and this is about an hour and 15 minutes. Interesting that at MIT they're still using the chalkboards. Now, they're kind of cool because they have the multiple layers of chalkboards, but they still like to use chalkboards, and we've actually gotten rid of them for the most part here at our college. So, just an interesting example of what's out there. So, as I scroll back up, I have a couple of more videos, and then here's one I found that was kind of interesting when we talk about college students and teenagers. And I really thought it was just kind of interesting about some of the statistics. So, I'm old, you guys are young for the most part, and so now we're looking at some of these things, and we always hear these horrible stories about what kids, teenagers, young adults, people in college are doing. And what we're finding out in some cases, you're doing less drugs, you're doing less television, you fight less. Now, I'm thinking that in some cases you're substituting television for watching videos on your phone, but, you know, whatever. But the fact that you're using less meth, you carry less weapons to school, and some of those are interesting. So, society has changed, and we always have this idea that it's always changing for the worse. And so this was an interesting article last year that came out that I just posted up there just to kind of give us a happy, good feel. So, we're going to talk then, Chapter 6 and 7, if you look at your quiz. So there is an hour quiz, 10 questions or so, I think it is. Most of them are actually from Chapter 7. There are only a few from Chapter 6. So, we don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole on that. So, let me pop up what we are going to look at today. So, some of this will be similar to what we've talked about in network design, but now we focus on the security aspect. We look at how do we focus and how do we deal with security. So, everything we've done in here, whether we're talking about hardware, whether we're talking software, whether we're talking physical, we think about security in layers. And so we do that when we talk about our network security also. We think about it in multiple layers. When you go outside and it's really, really cold, you put on multiple layers. It takes that cold longer to get through multiple layers. Well, the same way we think about it when we look at our network. We want layers of security. So, if we just have one security device that protects our entire network, and that happens to get broken, well, we're in trouble because everything then is available. So, we have to have a piece that we have multiple layers. The more layers, the better in most cases. And we also want to talk about a model. And so those of you that have taken the 310, we looked at that OSI model. And that OSI model, we can also use in security. The OSI model says that it's really based on the idea of how these different systems interact and how it works in the networking world. And so it breaks it into 7 layers. And again, there's that mnemonic to remember it. Programmers do not throw sausage pizza away. And so where standard devices land on this network map, then we can give some ideas about how we can make them more secure. So if we're talking really only at the physical layer, so that programmer's level, that P, at the physical layer, that could include even things like putting locks in unused network jacks or unplugging cables in the data closet to unused data jacks. So that physical all the way up to the software side. So how we define some of this works on how we talk about some of these devices. So switches and routers and different pieces we typically say are layer 3, or the third layer up from the bottom of how they work. Load balancers, proxy servers, all those different things work at different layers of this cake. And so this cake looks something like this. So I know this is a lot of material on one slide, but it's all the way from the physical layer to the application layer. So the application layer is where the user interface happens, other software communicates with something like Windows, all the way down to the physical layer. And this says the job of this layer is to send the signal to the network or receive a signal. So that's that physical connection or the antenna that we connect to a wireless. And so then we have layers in between that do specific tasks. And so as a signal goes to your computer, so one of the things you might think about is that signal comes into my computer, that picture that I just found on Google Images. And it comes into my computer at the physical layer, passes through the data link, goes to the network, goes through the transport, goes through the session layer, all the way up to the application layer, where it then goes into my Paint program so I can view the image of a skater from the Olympics. When I send something from my computer, so I send an email, that email program lays above that application layer, and it sends data all the way down through all these layers back out onto my network. So one of the things you've seen this called on a lot of TV shows is you'll hear it called the network stack. Well, this is that stack. This is all the layers of that cake that it has to go through to process. So this is the model that we're going to work from. And so there are certain devices. So if I look at a plain ordinary switch, so a switch just connects all my network devices together. We have one in the back room. You probably have a part of one at your house where you have multiple devices connected. All it really does, in the case of a normal switch, is connect those devices and sends all the information to one device out to the device it's supposed to go to. And so it uses something called a MAC address. And I know you're going, oh my God, why are we going through all this detail? But it goes up, so it connects physically and goes into this data link layer, and it says, oh, you need to go to this computer over here. Well, the way it knows that computer over there, how it identifies those devices on our network, are something called a MAC address. And so MAC addresses come up a lot. So MAC address really stands for Media Access Control. Inside of every device that connects to a network, it's a hard-coded address. So when I get a phone and it's got several different network connections, it's got a hard-coded address on it. When my computer has an address, it's hard-coded in there. And so the switches can use those MAC addresses to send information back and forth. Well, you can see that MAC address on your own computer. So we're going to get nerdy again, and if I click the Windows icon, and I type CMD, and I pop up that command prompt, which always wants to go in the other side. I want to know about my own computer and information about it. So I'm going to use one of the most common tools we use. It's called ipconfig. The letters IP, CONFIG. Internet Protocol Configuration is what it's short for. But I need one additional piece. I need to put a space and the slash underneath the question mark, and I type all, because I want to find out all the information in there, not just a short piece. So I then hit enter, and it will scroll through a ton of information. And so what it's going to show me is all kinds of information about my computer and my network. So this is a really handy tool to use for a lot of reasons. And so the first thing it's going to tell me is Well, my host name, SPS28, and then it's got an Ethernet adapter here. But notice that that says VirtualBox host, and we've all installed VirtualBox, so we have that operating system in the virtual land. That's not the one we want, because we've just kind of made that one up. And so that one may be on top. So I'm going to scroll down to the next one. And depending on your computer, it's not uncommon to have 3, 4, 5 different network connections. Your phone has several. Your computer will have several, especially a laptop that's going to have both wireless and wired. And so now I get down here and I have one that I look and says spslab.local. So that's in my computer lab. And it says Realtek PCI Gigabit Family Controller. Aha! I bet that's that wired connection. And I look at it, and it gives me a couple of different pieces in here. And it says, all right, here's my IP addresses. And we've touched on those a little bit. We're going to touch on them again. But if I scroll down even further, it's going to give me in the middle of this screen, it says a physical address. So the third item down on that Ethernet adapter, it says physical address. So if I ask you to tell me your MAC address on your computer, I can use this particular method to get it. That's the same as the physical address. It is burned in at the factory, and every one is different. The first half of it is the manufacturer, and so I can tell who made it. The last half is a unique number for every computer in there. So there are not ever two MAC addresses that are the same. So this should end security right here. We know that all these MAC addresses are unique, right? Except for we have some other issues, but we'll talk about how they come about. But every device that I pull up has a hard-coded MAC address. It's got to be. That's the way we work on things. So if I go into my house, every computer is going to have a separate MAC address. Here we just call it a physical address, but we can see that it's there. If you open up your computer, it's probably stamped on there also. So it forwards all your information based on that address that's in those IP packets to those MAC addresses. So a switch is really, really great because a switch is smart. And a switch says, I know that those two computers were trying to connect. And it only sends out the information to that particular computer. It doesn't send it out to the entire network. So many years ago, we used to use what were called hubs. And a hub put every piece of information on my network together. And so we just sent it out, and if it was sent out to you, that was great. If it didn't apply to you, you just ignored it. Well, we could then get everything that was sent out on our network. So, didn't have encryption, everything's out there. We could just run a packet capture, and we could get everything on our network. Well, now we have switches. And so switches are better. Switches literally make a connection from one computer to the other, and so they're really safe. They're looking at me like, there's something. So, switches do a couple of things, though. So, one of the things we can do with a switch that's really handy is we, as a network administrator, you would want to see all this traffic. You maybe want to test out and see what's going on. And so almost every switch, now, not the $20 models you buy at Best Buy, but the $400,000 to $40,000 models we use in industry, they're all going to have something like this. So they're going to have generally a port mirroring feature. So in other words, I can take one port of that and I can tell that switch, hey, I need to mirror every piece of traffic from your switch over onto this for test purposes. Oh, that's great. That works really well. And there are legitimate times we want to do that. We need to monitor that traffic. Maybe we've got some weird issues, people aren't able to connect. We can do that. And there's also some network taps that we can use, but generally we just use port mirroring because we know how this works. Here's the problem. If I'm on that network and I just happen to discover that there's a switch sitting there, and I know it can do port mirroring because I could see what the model number is. And our administrators have not changed the default administration username and password on that switch. Guess what? I can mirror that switch too. So if I can get physical access, holy cow, now I've got that entire network, all of the traffic, just sending me a little copy of it just for giggles. And then I can actually start to mine through that data. So what we're looking at is something like this. I've got my switch, all my stuff's connected to it. And if I'm a good guy, this is really great. I'm using a network analyzer to see what's going on for the good. But the reality is, any tool that we can use for good, we can also use for bad. Crap. So if I don't do things like very simple protocol best practice models, change the damn username and password on all my equipment, guess what I can do? Great. Now I've just mirrored off all your traffic. And I have actually done this before in several companies. I have went in with a little bit of homework. I figured out what they're running for switches, and I figured out, you know what? In this case, they didn't change default passwords. And it is one of the most common things people don't do. So, pardon my language, change the damn passwords. Change the username. Don't forget what it is. That's a problem on its own, but change it. If I can get in with admin1234, I'm going to do it. And once I'm in and I start pulling all your data, internally, we don't usually encrypt all our traffic inside. So every bit of traffic you send, passwords internally. All those kinds of things, guess what? We're able to find them and mine them out pretty easily. So this is what we would call a network tap, where we run a device in. But most of the time, the switches are really nice. They give us that information right away. We don't have to work very hard to get it. So here's what can go wrong. Oh, damn it. We know because I already talked about this little issue of port mirroring. So an attacker connects his device to the switch's mirror port, which if I can get into the switch, I can make any port that mirror port on most switches. So really, we should probably secure it. Yeah, but that's still not going to stop me if you didn't change your default passwords, because in almost every switch, I can tell what port I want to mirror it to, and if I can figure out what port I'm on, pretty easy to send it to me. So there's some other things that we can do. If I want to really attack a switch, because here's the fun thing about most switches. If that switch, so if I either use MAC flooding or another form of overflow, I cause that switch essentially to crash. I've exceeded the size of its MAC table that it can hold all those entries, and sometimes I can get it to crash. If I can get that switch to crash, the default mode is not to just completely shut down, because that would stop my business. The default mode is I'll just work like a hub, and I'll just put all this traffic together, and guess what? Now I can see all your stuff again because I'm connected into it. So once we can force it to become a hub, we can see all your traffic anyway. So there's a lot of different ways we can break those switches. Switches are great. The better quality switches, here's a surprise, they work better. They have bigger memory for MAC addresses. They're harder to break. But a couple of things people don't do. They don't change those usernames and passwords. Stupid. And they rarely, if ever, decide to update their switches to the latest firmware. Stupid. But part of that is, you're busy. You've got all these tasks. You're the system administrator. Put it on your calendar and do it. Those kinds of things are important. Because as soon as we see a security hole for an Aruba A31 switch, or whatever you happen to have, somebody's going to try to exploit it. So those updates become very, very critical. The other thing when you're in there doing it, just from a side point, is once you've got all those configurations, so you'll have a lot of data stored in there, pack that stuff up. It's vital. Because if you need to replace the switch, or the switch actually dies a physical death, or as in the case here in our own building, so we haven't really talked about VLANs yet, but VLANs are virtual LANs. So the port defines where something actually is connected in a virtual sense. So we had a computer technician on our staff here, and the data closet's kind of back over behind the pop machine in there. And there's stacks and stacks and stacks of 48-port switches in there. I think in this building there's about 300 connections. It was a mess. It physically looked like a mess. And this guy had a great idea, had really good thoughts. I'm going to color code all of this and make cables the right length so it looks very neat. Except he didn't have a clue what any of those switch assignments were, and he just started putting cables randomly wherever they would fit. And so suddenly this entire building ground to a halt. Luckily, it was during the summer, and they were able to go back in, but it took several weeks, quite frankly, to fix all those VLAN assignments that people had set up and trying to figure out what was going on. So, great intentions, and the reality was your network's down and people aren't able to do anything. So, we have a couple of other devices we need to look at. And so, a router. A router says it's going to connect two different computer networks. So, routers tend to be at layer 3. So, they're one more layer up. Some are even higher than that. So a router is what we use coming into our house. And so I have one over there on the wall up there in the window. And that one actually combines several functions. But when you get your internet connection, you need a router so that you can put several devices on the network. So your network is different than Windstream's network. And you can forward them from one network to the other. And that's what a router does. They can also do all kinds of other functions, and in the case of the stuff you buy for your house, it tends to also have things like wireless access points and switches built in for 4 ports and 30,000 other things. But a router itself does nothing more than connect two dissimilar networks. So it acts as kind of that intermediary, the translator between those two. Well, a router for a business can range anywhere from a couple $100 to thousands and tens and hundreds of thousands, quite frankly, if you want to spend that much. And you need that kind of speed and that performance. So we need a router. We can break those two. And the same goes, use the password change feature. Make sure you have it archived somewhere, what you're changing it to, but change it. And don't just change the password, change the name. Because, again, admin 1234, well, I went in and changed the password to 12345. I still know it's admin. And I can do a brute force attack really, really carefully. A lot of times, we add an additional feature either to a router or it's in a separate device, and it's called a load balancer. So a load balancer says, I have all this traffic, and I'm going to try to pass that traffic and distribute it to multiple sources. So it's kind of like the traffic cop when they have a Huskers game and you're standing out in the middle of the highway trying to go, you go left, you go right, you go left, you go right. So if you think about a very busy website, one physical server can't serve up all the web pages for Blackboard. So Blackboard has load balancers that come in to play, and it will send the data to the appropriate location. So it evenly or tries to evenly distribute data across the network. All right. So that's pretty good. Load balancers tend to be in either level 4, so they're more hardware-based, or they're more software-based. So they're looking at all the network traffic, or they look at what software you're actually running. So the higher up the level we go tends to be the more expensive. So level 4 load balancer, pretty cheap. It's kind of the dumb version. It just sees traffic and goes left, right, left, right, left, right. This one says, oh, you want to go to the volleyball game, you want to go to the football game. Volleyball, volleyball, football, basketball. So if you think about it this way, is one way to think about how those work. So layer 7 is more of a software. Layer 4, little dumber, but it's still a way that we can avoid overloading a single resource. We can optimize our bandwidth. So the more people we have connecting, the more we need this. So load balancers are a really good tool that we need to have. And then we have other things. So what other things can we throw in that load balancing? Well, load balancers can give us a couple of advantages about things like denial of service attacks. So in other words, they can act as a filter, and they can also allow us to distribute those resources. Because again, one computer, I have 10,000 computers trying to get a resource. One computer server on my side is not going to be able to handle it. But I can also build in rules that if they see that traffic, they can stop some of it or at least slow it down a little bit. Really big denial of service attacks are hard to stop because of the sheer volume of data coming in or going out depending on the... So, we also have the idea of something called a proxy. And a proxy says, I'm going to take your request for go to Journal Star, and I'm going to see if I already have that resource. So, in a lot of cases, we run a proxy server. So, the first time somebody goes to the Journal Star, it pulls down all the pictures and the ads and everything, and we don't store it just on your computer, but we store it here on a server at the college. And so the next time somebody goes to Journal Star, that proxy server says, hey, I have a copy of that page. Let me see if it's updated. It changes only that updated pieces, so maybe the main picture's changed, and sends it to you. So it minimizes our network traffic. But we can also use it for all kinds of other reasons. So we can redirect through a proxy all of our internet traffic. So, does anybody in here want to hide where they're going on the World Wide Web from their spouse/significant other? No? You guys are all honest? All right. So, let's say you did want to, because you're going to, say, Madison, or Ashley Madison, the Cheaters website. Oh. So, I don't want to just put in my address and go there directly. I want to figure out a way I can redirect it so it looks like it's coming through somebody else's computer, or we hide that traffic from our security software. And we can do that through a proxy. We have legitimate reasons for proxies. Sometimes we need to get around things. We have some illegitimate ones. So Netflix. If I travel to Europe, am I able to get into my US Netflix account? That'd be a no. Because we can actually see where some of that traffic comes from, and companies are restricted from selling services in other areas in some cases. Licensing restrictions, whatever. So, I'm traveling to Europe, I probably will use a proxy back here in the US to send all my traffic encrypted back, and so it looks like my traffic is coming from the United States. That way I can get my Netflix. Great. Any other reason we might want to use that? If we're a bad guy, is there any reason we might want to use that? Yeah, we can hide your communication, but what about, why would we ever want to hide anything? So, does anybody in here get ads for homework services? We'll do your homework for you. We'll just charge you a small amount. Does anybody get those? Oh. Where are those mostly at? Are they in the United States? So most of the people doing homework for a charge, are they doing it in the United States or are they doing it somewhere else? They're doing it somewhere else. Probably in India, China, Bangladesh, Korea, we've seen that. We've seen some from... Then there are some US-based people that will do the same thing. But if you just give them your Blackboard credentials and they log in from India, is that going to suddenly look weird to us here at the college because, hey, last night you were logged in and you were logged in from Peru, but today you seem to be logged in from some region in China. Do you think that's going to set off our network sensor so we go, we should probably check out this student? Yeah. And so there are other reasons we want to do that. So that proxy traffic. So a lot of large corporations will use proxy servers. That way they can tell where stuff is coming from and they can control that traffic. So if we want to talk about some bad actors, though, there's some other interesting things that happen in that homework. So you pay to get your homework done, and it may look okay, But if I did your homework once, and I know that other people are getting the same question, am I going to sell that homework to other people also? Yeah. And the best one of all is now some of those people doing things like the homework sites, they're now trying to blackmail people saying, oh, you know what? Now I need $1,000 from you, or I'm going to call your school and tell them that I did your homework for you. And we have actually had a student recently that went to their respective dean and told them that that was happening, that they had cheated, and that they were being blackmailed. And the response from a college was probably not as great as you would have thought in terms of being friendly. The response was they actually are no longer here as a student, and in fact their transcript is marked as that they were a plagiarizer. So there's a lot of advantages to proxies. So we use them for speed. We can maintain our amount of traffic, and it's much quicker for me to serve you up pictures of the Journal Star locally than it is to repeatedly go all the way to the Journal Star's website, wherever that happens to live. I can manage content, so that gives me a little better security. I can stop traffic because it goes through and it sets in my proxy server. If there's some malicious content, sometimes I can stop it there. And there are a lot of ads, even on legitimate websites. There are a lot of ads and things that are not necessarily very healthy. So we need to worry about that a little bit. So here's kind of our model of what we're looking at. So here's our proxy server sitting in the middle. Here's the world of the internet out here. And there's our router. And then it's got some form of a firewall. Our proxy server sits in here, comes to our switches, and then our internal computers on our network. So that's not a bad description of what our network would look like. And we're going to add some additional pieces to that. So we're going to talk about what a firewall is. So firewalls, and if you watch the movie I.T. or you watch a lot of the NCIS or any of the shows on TV, this firewall is this magic device we plug in, and it stops everything from happening, right? It fixes the world. So generally, we have two different types of firewalls. We have a software firewall, and you have it on your computer. And it's just a set of rules that say, I'm going to stop certain things. And so Windows has got a pretty decent firewall built in. You can buy software in your security software that adds another firewall or replaces that. So that's a software-based one. But you're already on the computer. You're really close to the home target. If I look where we place a hardware firewall, so that hardware firewall really is in between the internet and us. So we have a router that allows us to connect multiple networks, and then we have this firewall sitting here. And all of our traffic going into our network passes through that firewall. So that firewall has a couple of things it can do. So stateless packet filtering. So it gets a packet, so that chunk of data, and it says, oh, I think this can go, or I don't think it can go. And in other words, we don't keep track of it really. We just say, oh, it's the right type of packet. It's an image file. We're going to let it go through. Or, oh, that's a BitTorrent file. We're going to stop it. So it looks at it. We write a rule, and it stops or allows traffic in or out. So a stateful packet filter then, so it looks at that entire connection, not just an individual packet, but it looks at that entire session that you're having with another server. And based on that connection, it says, yes, this is legitimate traffic, or no, this is not legitimate traffic. So stateless packet filtering. That little $100 guy back on the wall back there will do some form of stateless packet. I can put in a few rules. Not very many, but I can put in a few. Stateful, then, is a much greater filtering level. And what we can do then is, again, we can do a couple of things. Once that packet or that chunk of data gets there, we can do a couple of things. We can allow it, or we can reject it. So we reject it and we say, all right, we don't put it in our network, but we also send a message back to the sender. We can also just drop it. And dropping it, so we don't send a message back, which violates a little bit of the rules of the network world. And one of the problems with that is when we just drop a packet, a lot of times that server on the other end keeps sending it back and forth. And so if we have enough of those, we can actually create a little bit of an issue. But these are all what we call rule-based. So we create a rule that says, based on that packet, it's coming from a certain area or an address, we know that we want to drop it or we want to reject it. So the most basic ones, we can write a couple rules in there. We start going up, and we both go up in complexity and in price. Those are ones that we call things like application-aware firewall. So not only does it see that packet, but it also says, oh, I know where this is really going, and it can do some better detection of what it looks like. So we can also do ones that are even better than that, and these actually look into the packet, not just at the outside the header and say, where's it going, where's it coming, what does it look like. They actually go in and read the packet and see what the content is, because we put a lot of traffic now in HTTP or HTTPS. We put it all into that port 80 or port 443 traffic. And so it could be anything from a web page to BitTorrent packets to video files. And so now we can actually go inside of that packet and we can look at it a little better. And so one of the other terms you're going to see is something called packet shaping. So we do packet shaping on the campus. If you were to try to get into like the BitTor networks and use BitTor on our campus, we block it because it takes up too much bandwidth, and we also have some liability if you start downloading a ton of illegal software or illegal movies. We don't want that letter from coming to us, coming to you at some point. So the other thing we want to think about with network security is that firewall. Is anybody in here, is that their entire job, 24 hours a day, to write firewall rules? And do you go out and you search every day to see what's the latest attack vectors? No. So most of the time at a business level, we buy firewalls that we can buy rule sets for. And so we buy a subscription. So one of the cheaper ones is a company called Meraki, which is part of Cisco, if you kind of follow through the chain. But Meraki has some pretty decent firewalls. And you pay for the types of rules that you put onto those firewalls. And generally, you're paying $500 to $1,000 a year or more to get those rules. It comes in and updates every hour or even more frequently. And what it will do is then it can respond to issues that are going on in real time. So maybe we suddenly have in Croatia an attacker group has found some new exploit code and is trying to probe everybody's computers. We can actually have a fairly quick response time to those. So when I say the word firewall and you're in Best Buy and they go, yeah, this $50 router's got a firewall, they're not lying. It's just not a really, really good firewall. It doesn't have that ability to get data every week or every month or every hour and update. And it's very, there's very limited numbers of rules it can actually run. So we also use a couple of other types of really useful filters. So here at our college, we actually use, from a company called Barracuda, their spam filter. And I've used them in a lot of other places. They just happen to, in one case, actually agree with me on something. And Barracuda makes some pretty decent spam filters. So spam email, and you're like, well, really? We have a filter? Look at all the email we get. Well, you get a lot, but you don't get everything. And in fact, at the last count at our college, we were getting about 300,000 emails a day. And you go, that just doesn't seem. About 3 to 5% of them are legitimate. 90+% of the email out there is spam mail. And so if you look at what you're getting in your folder and you go, man, I'm getting a lot of crap, the reality is there's more of it out there. And before Netflix, it was actually the biggest chunk of network traffic. And here's the reality is, they wouldn't be sending it if some idiot, some uneducated user didn't respond to the Viagra ads, or respond to the balding ads, or respond to the ads for whatever it is that we're out right now. There's hundreds and hundreds and thousands of them. So generally we put in some kind of a spam filter. And we look at that and we have some way to do that. So spam filters, you got to remember email has some limitations. It comes in on port 25, and let's just say you need a spam filter. How about that? So this is what a spam filter would look like. So here's our email sender, here's our receiver. So the SMT, Simple Mail Transport Protocol, that's what sends the mail, goes to a spam filter. The server then relays it. POP3 is Post Office Protocol 3, the portion that you get when you receive it on the older style of email. So this is just really saying we need one of those in place. So most companies invest in spam filters. Now, if you host your email primarily outside of your company, so you're using all email that's hosted outside, you don't have an email server, most of the time you're buying that service with the email. So you may spend an extra $3 an email address for some kind of spam filter. So this is another version. That's where that spam filter comes in and blocks the spam before it gets to your email. And again, we're talking 90% of it, you're still going to see little chunks of it. We can't block it all. And depending on your business, so you would think at a college there's a lot of things we can block. But the reality is, for research purposes, there's some things that we think, hey, I should be able to block on a keyword pretty easily. Can't do that. I worked in a medical facility and helped set up some things there, and we also ran into the same thing. So, I thought using, there are some words that we thought we could block. Apparently not. Some of the doctors did not use proper medical terminology for, say, breast. So we could not use a key phrase that had the word boobs in it. You had to let boobs through. So, depending on that situation, you sometimes have to tailor those spam filters for your individual application. So my rainbows and kitties approach is a little sad. But I have a good thing. So here is actually a really good thing. So this is, a VPN is a great way I can make a connection into my network just like I were sitting there on that local secured network. So I can go through the public internet. I can sit in my hotel room and I can connect back to my desktop just like I'm sitting there, and it's secure. We used that encryption that we were learning about, and we encrypted it completely. So we can have a couple of different types. So a remote is a single, so a user back into my network. I can also have site-to-site connections. So some of you know where Humboldt, Nebraska is, right? Humboldt, Nebraska has a small medical clinic. Has anybody seen it? Chloe's like, yeah, I've seen it before. So we set up a site-to-site VPN from that clinic back to Falls City to the hospital. So they are essentially, it is, when you were sitting in that clinic, it is the same as if you were sitting in that hospital. All the same security, all the same logins. And it passes through the public internet, but it's all encrypted. So it's tunneled through there. So a couple of terms you may run into. You may see the term endpoint. So in the case of that clinic, it's got an endpoint that is a hardware device. Or it may be, in some cases, we have them inside of a router. Some of the routers we can buy have the ability to have VPN services. Or we may have the term, you may see what's called a VPN concentrator. So some places are very large. So IBM has a lot of remote workers. Well, they need VPN concentrators that allow hundreds and thousands of, or not tens of thousands of workers to come into that VPN service. Apple Corporation uses VPN services. So, how many of you have got an Apple device of some sort? Phone, watch, something. Most of you in here have some kind of Apple device. And if you decided you wanted to call Apple Care and you needed some technical advice, do you think in a lot of cases you're calling to a big office corporation building? No. Apple has an interesting process where you can get hired on as a technician for Apple for phone services, and you're sitting in your pajamas in your house. And so they use those VPN concentrators to bring people back in to the mothership, as it were. So it's not actually a bad gig. Doesn't pay the greatest, but you get health benefits and you have a fairly flexible schedule. Now, those people working at home get to work all the holidays, but, if you're, kind of antisocial anyway. So, those VPNs are usually done with either some kind of a tunneling protocol. I'm trying to think how far down the rabbit hole we want to go. Let's just say that we have two different types. We have L2TP and we have IPsec. So they're different types of models, but they accomplish the same goal. They encrypt that tunnel all the way through there. So it's like they've dug through the World Wide Web and they've created a tunnel. Well, that's not all the things we might want to put on our network. We might also want to put on internet content filters. Why would we want to care or want to monitor what you're doing on the internet? As a corporation, do I care what you do? Yeah. So my main goal is probably to keep you productive. I also really don't want you posting bad things on Facebook about the very company you're working for. But internet content filters allow me to block access to websites and files. And I actually showed you inside of the Cloud AVG product where we can do it on a software side. We can also do it with a hardware device plugged in, much like that firewall. And there's legitimate reasons. Sometimes traffic is a little sketchy, but these can give us reports based on who's going where on the internet, based on filtering, and sometimes we may have some wild cards in there. So pretty much every content filter is going to not allow any content to the .xxx domain, right? So we have a lot of pieces like that. But we may also want to stop things like gambling sites. A lot of people gamble online when they're supposed to be at work. Or they shop. We find that they're on Amazon all the time. So we can stop that and we can monitor where people are going. Not a bad thing to have necessarily. But again, it's another piece we're going to put in there. Another layer of that security. So if people can't go to the nasty, dirty porn site, they're probably going to be a little less chance of them getting some kind of a virus, right? Yeah. So we can filter. Some of them also do things like they'll look at malware too. So we have a third filter in there with that internet content filter. Maybe it stops file downloads, or it will read them, or it'll block different types of downloads. So they're really a great idea. Again, you have to have somebody administer them and set them up. And you do have to check and see what people are going to. Now, sometimes you'll see things that you can't unsee. And I actually got involved in an HR process, and it was an EMT. Well, the EMTs in a lot of cases work these long, weird 24 and 48-hour shifts. So they've got a house they stay at, much like a firefighter in a lot of cases. And, well, at this particular location, the content filter kept alerting. And it was set up to, if you went to a couple of sites, it didn't really say much. But if your account profile and you're repeatedly going to sites that hit it, we could all right, we're getting a report on, let's see where you're going. Well, again, medical facilities, so it was a little more relaxed in terms of where they could go. Well, this particular guy as it turns out, it was not the only reason he got fired. He had some other creepy tendencies. Apparently, hitting on every one of your female coworkers is not allowed in the HR world. But he also liked to show off the websites that he found. And he spent a disturbing amount of time at websites that involved inserting glass objects where they did not belong, breaking the objects, and then taking them back out. Did not even know such objects. That is a thing that I cannot unsee. So, that was part of that evidence log of why did you get fired. Now, the interesting thing, because I had to testify when he applied for, not workman's comp, unemployment, because he claimed that he was fired unfairly. Yeah. So I got dragged into it again a couple of times. Luckily, I got a bill by the hour on that one, because it's one of those things you just can't take your brain back away from. So now we have another term that's come about. And some of these tend to be marketing schemes, because some of this we've already done, and now they put them together, and sometimes they use the term gateway. Well, and gateway's been used before. So quite frankly, the combination DSL router, wireless, and everything up on the board over on the wall over there was actually marketed as a gateway, because we put all these pieces together. Well, now we're seeing it again in the security side. We're seeing them called gateways. There's a whole lot of other terms. You'll see the term UTM come out, Unified Threat Management, and several other ones. But so essentially what it is they're trying to bundle all these pieces into one device. So it's a firewall. It's a web connection monitor. It will block internet connections, and it looks at malicious content. And what we're really doing is it's nothing different than these pieces we've talked about. Now we're bundling them all together. And so web traffic, so it's a web content filter kind of on steroids. So maybe it'll block instant messenger programs. And so sometimes from a business standpoint, we want to do that. So what's the problem with instant messaging, like Facebook messaging? I kind of like it. Facebook messages give me a quick way to talk to people, right? Are there businesses where information I have to track every communication I send? So here at the college, in theory, maybe we won't use the college as an example. Bad example. Let's try something different. So if you sell securities, you sell stocks, do you have to track in that company every communication you send to detect insider trading and other things? Yeah. If I'm at a hospital, can I send out information about a patient? Just type out there, hey, Britney Spears is in our hospital. No. And so in a lot of cases, we block instant messenger and other programs to avoid legal issues, and we have to do that. Here, in theory, we have to do some of the same things here under FERPA, but let's not talk about that, because that'll go off on another gateway. But so things like instant messenger. So a lot of companies have instant messenger type programs that they approve of that actually are hosted at their local office, or they get logs of all the transactions. So if you have a chat session with your broker, it's most likely a logged connection. Everything you say is actually in a log, and we can actually go through and discover it if we need to. So that kind of area on instant messenger. So the other thing that instant messenger can do is you can send a lot of files and horrible stuff. Most of you have probably been attacked at some point by the evil videos on Facebook Messenger where they're adding stuff to you. Network security. So we're really kind of in the heart of this now. So now we're going to add something else. So we know we can detect all this traffic coming in, but now we want to detect if we are being hacked. And we can actually use a system called an IDS. Not the IBS commercial where you have intestinal bowel syndrome. IDS, Intrusion Detection System. So intrusion detection systems look at all of your traffic coming into your network, and they can identify common attack vectors that people are doing. And what they can do then is they send you an alert and say, hey, we think you're being attacked. If we take it one step further then, we have one called a prevention system. So the prevention system says, not only am I being attacked, but I will stop that attack or shut down my connection completely one way. So, things that we look at. So, we look at what's going on in the rest of the world, so they may look at anomalies or signature patterns, what we have seen at common attacks around the world. Behavior, there's something weird. So our network used to do this, suddenly our network is going differently. And it can look at those behaviors and see what's going on. And sometimes they're wrong. They're not always 100%. But it looks at that security profile and looks at things. A really good intrusion detection system doesn't look at just the information going into your network. It's really also looking at the information going out. Why would information going out be a better thing to even look at? If my goal is to get into your company and get all your client data or your patient data or your student data, what am I going to have to send out? All that information I'm trying to steal, and I can then look at it and watch it when it starts to come out. Suddenly I can identify, hey, there's NUIDs going out in large quantities out of our system. Maybe I should do something about it. So it's not necessarily just always what goes into our network. We also want to look at what goes out. And so this is just kind of a little table. We're going to jump past that really quick because it's the same type of things. So host-based, so HID systems. So it's software. And it's mounted on every system. So a lot of malware, very large-scale malware systems will have some kind of a host-based system. So it really looks at what's going in and out of individual systems, what's going into files. So a lot of securities, this makes a lot of sense. We know some computers or some servers are far more vulnerable than others. And so it's involved and sets on every system. So it's a little agent. Well, the bad thing to that is it doesn't monitor anything that's outside of that computer, doesn't monitor the whole network. It tends to store all this stuff locally, and it really can slow down a computer significantly. And so we've already added all these other things. We've got very large resources. So that computer gets slowed down, people complain and whine, and they manage to figure out a way to turn them off. So in some cases, it's a great idea. But most of the time, the best way to do it is actually a network-based system. So network-based systems, we put sensors or agents on all different kinds of things like firewalls, routers, servers. Probably not on individual endpoints of the computers, although there are some systems that do look at that and tie them all together. And so not only does it look at the entire network, traffic going in and out of our system, but it gives us a way we can look at previous history. So if we just install one today, that monitor is probably not really good. Although if suddenly we install one today and we see all these NUIDs going out, we might want to be a little bit suspicious. But one of the problems with any of these systems, so intrusion detection, prevention, it's hard to find the size of a company that can have somebody that's all they do is read these logs and work on it. So it sounds really great. It can work really great, but your company has to be willing to throw out the resources. So does somebody like State Farm do that? Yeah. Does Peru State have the resources to do that? No. So we also have to look at the resources. And a really good network system like this, you're probably talking a starting point of $100,000 on up. And that may be involved licensing fees then of $10,000 to $20,000 to $30,000 a year. So some really good ones are out there. They will look at everything from, I know which computers have which software and what their packages are going to look like, and I can look at the information once we've programmed it in that we have. So IPS is then that idea that prevention, so just getting an email and saying, hey, your system's been compromised, really seems like a bad idea. Most systems are now moving to the idea of an IPS where they can block that attack. So that attack then will get stopped. So we've all seen the commercials for the credit monitoring services. And I can't think which one it is, but he says, I'm a credit monitor, and then he goes in, I'm a dental monitor and checks your teeth, and then he goes, you have a big cavity, but I can't do anything because I'm just a monitor. Well, we really want to stop this stuff as soon as possible. The longer we allow people on our network, the more damage they can do. And so we need to figure out how to stop them as quickly as possible. And some of the really scary things that we're seeing are the length of time people have been inside of a system before we discover it. And in some cases, that's 6 to 9 months. In 6 to 9 months, you might as well close the door because they already know all your information. They have all your customers. They have all your clients. They've built themselves in back doors. So we need to figure out some ways to get them out of there. So here's our buddy, this UTM. So UTM is that idea, and it's kind of the new buzzword of we're combining all these pieces together. And so on Thursday, I'll bring you guys one and let you take a look at what a UTM looks like. So online, and won't have quite the luck, but you guys on campus will. So puts all these things together. Anti-phishing, in other words, tries to block the phishing emails. Antivirus, anti-spyware, stops viruses before they get to your computer. Content filtering, encryption, firewall, instant messaging, intrusion protection, detection. That sounded like some kind of a salesman there. And there are some really good ones, but just by throwing the label UTM, what some people have done is really repackaged their small firewall and said, guess what, we got a UTM. It's only $499. And that's kind of the model we'll show you and take a look at. And it does some of these features, and for a small business, it's probably a really great idea, but does it do everything? No. So, kind of interestingly, and we'll leave it here with this idea, is one of the things that has actually saved our butts in a lot of cases is something called natural address translation. We got natural address translation as an unintended byproduct of not having enough IP addresses out on the World Wide Web. And so by doing that, sometimes this has actually saved us, because the original model of the internet was every computer would have an outside address. You could just communicate from one computer to another anywhere in the world. But we've soon kind of figured out we don't have enough IP addresses for this. And so we ended up doing some what we call NAT, or natural address translation. So when you get your router at home, you get one IP address from Cox Cable, Windstream, whoever. And then all the devices on the inside are on a private address. And so when it goes back out, it switches them to the public, and so it combines all those addresses and then sends it back out. And we have a problem here in our lab because we only have one IP address, and we send it out, and so if 10 people at once try to sign up for a service on Google, we get rejected because Google goes, whoa, there's all these same people trying to do this. It's spammers. But the reality is, it's given us some security that we didn't realize we even had to begin with. And so we'll talk about what that is. And we'll also talk about something called port addresses. So ports are really adding an IP and a port together to create something called a socket. So we'll work out the idea of a socket. So make sure you have read chapter 6. Make sure you have read, well, chapter 6 to page 239, I think it is. Whatever the page number I list in there. I also, is it 260 what? 261. I also reference where it is because one of the things I've discovered, the online version of the book, the paging is different sometimes. So look where I say to stop. And you will need to read chapter 7. You might want to even look at those videos. Those videos are great. Don't watch them at 9:15 when you decided you wanted to stay awake though. So, they're all short. They're like 4 to 5 minutes long in there, except the MIT one. The MIT one's like an hour and 15 minutes. But it's kind of interesting to see We're doing the same stuff that MIT's doing, guys. We're talking about the same concepts. Only they have really cool chalkboards, and I don't have really cool chalkboards. And you notice they have somebody filming their session, and I'm just wandering around with a microphone. Apparently they have better budgets than we do. All right. I will see you on Thursday, barring, of course, we have another snow day, because, of course, it's going to snow on Thursday again, from what I understand.